In this video, I will briefly explain you how to write a report. This model can be used in any written paper that evaluates two different points of view. Of course, in this case, it will include the ethical perspective and it will be only 350 words long. So let's imagine that the topic of our report is the legal regulation of prostitution. There are four steps before writing. The first one is to decide if you are pro or against the topic. We will be for. The second step is to think of at least two arguments of your opponents. You can use the ones that you heard during the debate. Remember that they should be ethical arguments, meaning they should be focused on the persons. Since we are in favor, we have to look for arguments against the legal regulation of prostitution. We can then mention that it promotes the denigration of the female body and that it supports a practice that is already risky for the human health. The third step is to think how to tackle your opponent's arguments. We can say that the regulation of prostitution protects the practitioners from physical abuses or murder and that sexually transmitted diseases would decrease. The fourth and last step is to look for at least two sources either to present the situation, to mention your opponent's arguments, or to support your own point of view. You can look for statistics, specialist opinions, other countries' situations, etc. For our example, I found the following data: the number of sexual workers in Mexico City in a journal, and in Google Books I found information about prostitution as a risky work. Now it's time to write down our ideas. Remember the general parameters: font Arial, size 12 points, spacing 1.5. Since our report should be of 350 words, we may structure our text in four paragraphs: one for the introduction, one for the exposition of the opponent's arguments, one for defending our own arguments, and one for the conclusion. Let's start. The paragraph of the introduction should contain an invitation to the topic, the ethical relevance, and the structure of the report. For example, prostitution is a worldwide and millenary practice. It can be traced in archaeological sites such as Pompeii and in ancient books such as the Bible. This is the invitation to the topic. Then we can continue with the ethical relevance. Remember to point out how the persons are affected by the problem. Ever since prostitution has existed, it has come along a moral questioning of the misuse of the body and sexuality, but it has been impossible to stop it. On the contrary, in recent decades, in capitalist and democratic societies, it has been discussed its legal regulation in order to protect the persons from the intrinsic perils this practice involves. Afterwards, we have to mention how are we going to structure our text. Therefore, in this report, I will evaluate both sides of the coin in terms of respect of the body and individual and public health, defending that the regulation of prostitution might protect human integrity. You may pause this video and write your introduction. Remember, it must contain an invitation to the topic, the ethical relevance, and the structure. In the second paragraph, we may point out our opponent's arguments. It is important to include the ethical perspective, that is, to mention the values, virtues, vices, or the human conditions that are involved in the problem. Turn to another author to illustrate your points. Since we defend the legal regulation of prostitution, we have to speak first about the cons. The second paragraph could be: one argument against the regulation of prostitution is that it promotes the denigration of the female body. Contrary to Kant's categorical imperative to use always a person as an end, in this practice one uses the female body as an object since it is prized, and sexuality is not understood as an act of love but in economic terms. The customer pays to use a body in order to get pleasure. Furthermore, this practice entails a risk either to the customer and to the objectified person. Prostitution would be one of the clearest cases of sexual relations that place women at risk. These risks include physical violence and possible AIDS infection. Notice that in this paragraph the ethical perspective is included. We mentioned a categorical imperative, we contrasted love versus economics and pleasure, and we underlined that prostitution is risky for the person. Also, notice that we used one of the sources and used quotation marks. You may pause this video and write your second paragraph. Don't forget to add the ethical perspective. After listing your opponent's perspective, it's time to hear your own point of view. Don't forget to underline the ethical aspects of the situation and to turn to another author to illustrate your points. The third paragraph could be: in fact, it is because of these risks that prostitution should be legally regulated. Only in Mexico City, 70,000 personas ejercen la prostitución, de las cuales se calcula que 18,000 son menores. There's no problem if you quote in Spanish. Thus, we are speaking about a social situation that involves human lives. It is true that the government should provide secure jobs with fair incomes. Prostitution is not one of these, but its regulation at least would protect the practitioners from possible aggressors, preventing them from physical abuse and murder. In addition, the peril of an increase of sexually transmitted diseases can be addressed. On one hand, the use of condom could be established as compulsory. On the other hand, sexual workers could have access to regular checkups and proper treatment in case of infection. Notice that in this paragraph the ethical perspective is included. We underline that prostitution involves human lives and that its regulation protects the persons, their integrity, and entitles them with access to health services. Also notice that we used our second source and used quotation marks. You may pause this video and write your third paragraph. Don't forget to add the ethical perspective. Now we may write the conclusion. In this report, I have discussed the regulation of prostitution, pointing out that despite the use of the body and poverty as a reason of practicing prostitution, one can neither deny the existence of this work nor reduce it to the objectification of the person. Sexual work might not be the ideal job, but its regulation is a way to protect the persons whose integrity is already vulnerable. And there it is. Just add a title and list your references. Click the link in the description of the video to get information about APA references. So here's the summary of what we have done in this video. We wrote an introduction with an invitation to the topic, the ethical relevance of the topic, and the structure of the report. We wrote a second paragraph with our opponent's arguments. We wrote a third paragraph with our own ethical arguments. And we wrote the conclusion. Don't forget to use APA and submit it to Schoology.